Hello, I'm Gary Johnson, president of the Chicago History Museum, and I welcome you to this year's 4th of July celebration, our 61st for the Chicago History Museum. All the rest have been in Lincoln Park. This year, because of the quarantine and the fact that the park is closed, technically, we're doing it virtually. Virtually, however, I think you'll see does have some advantages. Because for the first time, instead of focusing on a single oration by a single speaker during the program, we'll have the privilege of hearing from different voices from individuals around the city of Chicago who are participating from their own homes. And you yourselves will be participating from your homes. So thank you for helping us start something new. We'd like to thank the staff of the Chicago History Museum, as we always do, for putting this program together, and thank the Chicago Park District for supporting everything that the Chicago History Museum does for the people of Chicago. Every year on the 4th of July, we honor a special group, and I'd like to do so at this point. If we were out in the park, I would ask every military man and woman in the audience to stand up and receive our applause. The ones who are in active service today, the ones that have served their country in the past and are now veterans from any branch of service. We thank you for your service to our country. But this year, we have two other groups that I would like to honor, very special groups. The first is all those who have been on the front line of fighting the COVID-19 virus. You're real heroes, and the city thanks you for your work. But we also want to cite those people every day in essential service who have gone to work when the rest of us have been sheltering at home, who have ridden public transportation, have gone and punched at time clocks, served in grocery stores and other capacities. We want to remember and honor you because we couldn't all have gotten through what we're getting through without the important work that all of you are doing. So thank you. Thank you all. And now today's program. Today's program will be in two parts. The first part we are calling We the People, Chicago Responds. These are difficult times for all of us, not only because of the quarantine, but because of the social and political unrest that we all are witnessing. So there will be two parts to today. The first is We the People, Chicago Responds. And we have the mayor of Chicago and 4 community leaders who will respond with their own thoughts and their own wisdom on what the Declaration of Independence, what July 4th mean to them in the context of the times that we're living in with social, civil unrest. The second part will give Chicago youth a chance for them to look forward to what they envision in the kind of city that they would like when they are leading the city, a city that is equitable, a city that they would be proud to serve as leaders of. And that part will include these Chicago young adults offering up their art, whether in the form of dance, poetry, or spoken word, as they look forward to the future of Chicago. So, the young adults participating in that part 2 will come from the groups Young Chicago Authors, Mikveh Challenge, and Kuumba Links. But now we are going to begin with part 1, We the People, Chicago Responds. We are honored that Mayor Lori Lightfoot will lead off by reading the opening words of the Declaration of Independence and then offering her thoughts. She will be followed by Ibu Patel, the founder and president of Interfaith Youth Corps. Then will come Laura Washington, columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times, political analyst for ABC 7 Chicago. Laura will be followed by Jamal Cole, founder and CEO of My Block, My Hood, My City. And finally, the speaker will be Linda Tortolero, president and CEO of Las Mujeres Latinas en Acción. I will then wind up the program and offer a brief reflection, as I do every year, on a few years that resonate in my mind with the times we're in, words from the Declaration of Independence. And now, Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governance are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Though the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776, the spirit of its preamble rings truer than ever today. All men, and I would add all women, are created equal. And whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is right of the people to alter or abolish it. All levels of government across the country are hearing the cries of protesters. It is long past time to alter our criminal justice system so that it treats everyone as equals. Chicago, you have my word that I see you and I hear you. I want to use this moment we're in as an opportunity to make real change. With your help, your voices, and your energy, we will turn the tides of injustice and righteous anger and create that more perfect union our founding fathers aspired all those years ago, one where we are all equal, and where we will work together in our shared mission of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We will move forward toward a better future for every Chicago resident in every neighborhood. We will correct the original sin. Please join me in this most important journey. Thank you.
My name is Ibu Patel. I'm founder and president of the Chicago-based Interfaith Youth Corps, which works with young people and college campuses, building interfaith cooperation for the common good. I am thrilled to be a part of this project on the Declaration of Independence with the Chicago History Museum. And the line that I want to read is actually the final line of the Declaration. It goes like this: "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." There are two dimensions of this that I'd like to lift up. Number one, the notion that these founders were attempting to build a different kind of community with a different set of relationships to one another, a democratic community, a civil society, a republic. I love the line, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives." It reminds me of the line in the late great Chicago poet Gwendolyn Brooks, "We are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond." Of course, the founders never imagined Gwendolyn Brooks, a black female poet, to be an equal member of their democratic republic. That was a grievous sin and a crime against humanity that the founders, in their beautiful declaration, could not imagine all members of the human family to be equal parts. And yet, we can build on what the founders did. We can expand the nation. That's precisely what's happening right now in the United States, with not just the protests in the streets, but the spirit in the air. The idea that we can fulfill the promise of the nation. I want to speak for a moment about that spirit, because in this last line of the Declaration, there's an awful lot of spirit involved. The founders speak of divine providence. They speak of their sacred honor. America is a project of faith, and the improvement and perfection of America is a project of faith. People have referred to the United States as a New Jerusalem, a beloved community, a cathedral of humanity. Abe Lincoln speaks of the better angels of our nature. John Winthrop talked about building a city on a hill. Muslims call America a new Medina. How can we have the faith to expand the American project to truly include everybody, to truly have liberty and justice for
In 1776, the founders wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Massive quantities of data, studies, commentary, and events have documented the fact that people of color are oppressed by structural and institutional racism. Decade after decade, century upon century, the broken bodies and broken hearts have piled up. And this nation refused to acknowledge that fact. Now Americans of all races have been moved to respond to this moment. Mayors, governors, and police leaders are taking a knee. Every major corporation, it seems, is pledging solidarity with people of color. White marchers are flooding the streets to join their black brothers and sisters in noble protest. They say they want to listen. They call for change, task forces, committees, lawsuits, reforms. Those calls are welcome. But first, understand that America's racist police culture is the tip of the iceberg. Racism is embedded in American culture. If America really wants to change, we collectively and individually must acknowledge that our nation was built on racism. The founders declared this nation independent from tyranny. Our forefathers then proceeded to structure the racist society that prevails today. Our history tells the story. Before we can move together, we must acknowledge that history. Can we acknowledge that racism is embedded in American culture? Will we collectively admit that our leaders plundered and murdered indigenous Americans to profit from their land? That our world-class economy was founded on the backs of black bodies stolen from Africa? Will we talk out loud about the countless American industries that have been vastly enriched by a capitalist system that excludes and exploits people of color? Until we do, all those calls for change will ring hollow. In 1776, the founders declared that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government. In 2020, if we really want change, we must begin to abolish our racist system in all its forms. Only then can we begin the journey to life and liberty for all.
So I'm Jamal Cole. I'm the founder of My Block, My Hood, My City, and we take care of people no matter what. So back in 2003, I visited Great Britain, and it was the first time I ever seen or heard, a white man call me an American. Prior to visiting the UK, I was always, he's black or African American even, but never just American. This is the first time a white man looked past the color of my skin and identified me by my country, right? I started watching the History Channel from the British perspective, and that kind of awakened my interest in my own country. What I found, I started learning about the Second Continental Congress and their grind back in the late 1700s. They wanted independence from Great Britain, and they were willing to do whatever. And these was regular people. They had to convince farmers and teachers and just neighbors to take up arms and go to war with the biggest army in the history of the world, right? So they say. But that reminds me of our struggle that we deal with today. They wanted independence from Great Britain, and we're willing to revolt to get it, right? Today, we want independence we want police to stop killing us, and we want them to hold authority accountable, and we want them to, and then we'll stop protesting institutional murder and oppression of black people by authorities. So that's what we want. And what are we willing to do to get it, right? So again, they had to convince farmers and their neighbors to take up arms. And some people, most people, didn't want to be bothered. They wanted to be left alone. That kind of reminds you of some people today. You say, hey, I want to, are you going to go vote? Hey, are you going to come to the library? Are you going to get involved? What's something simple you can do? Most people, they want to be left alone. They don't want to be involved. So I think that's the Second Continental Congress. Their passion is what you see in the faces of a lot of organizers in Chicago, Baltimore, Atlanta, and all over the country right now. So.
In a unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, Congress set forth, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." In the year 2020, our United States government still remains largely instituted among men, white men with the privilege they hold because of their gender and race. Women, especially women of color and immigrant women, remain largely underrepresented in elected offices at every level of government. Our lack of power is rampant. Without proper representation, the inequities women of color have continue without adequate checks. Consequently, equitable investments for women's own pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness are not prioritized in a multitude of areas: health, childcare, contraception, entrepreneurship, employment, higher educational advancement, and more. If the governed are women, especially women of color, who are increasingly the heads of households and owners of businesses, and our government fails to meet their needs, how can we as a nation honestly claim that we support the happiness of all American families? For instance, Latinas face numerous barriers, and our lack of adequate representation in government continues. Latinas only make 49.2 cents to every dollar a white man makes in the state. In comparison to every other racial and ethnic group of women, we fall behind in Illinois. Today, Latinas make up about 9% of the U.S. population, but of the 127 women serving in the 116th U.S. Congress, 13 are Latina, about 3% of all members of the House. We must not overlook that people make up institutions to protect our rights. Our government may have institutional checks and balances and the rule of law, but those protections need people who will intentionally and tirelessly work to dismantle systemic racism and other types of discrimination towards historically oppressed groups. Why? Because without equitable representation and power, all the people do not lead and govern our nation, and the consent of the governed is not fully secured. because consent requires earned approval. A government's consent of the governed, the people, cannot hold when government implicitly and explicitly ignores groups that constitute the American people. As a result, the people's trust and approval of government erodes. Government must also represent the voices of protesters in the streets, families in their homes, children learning in school, survivors of violence and the homeless, nonprofit workers supporting their community, and entrepreneurs opening their first business. It is the duty of our elected leaders and government representatives to respond to the demands of all governed people. Our society's mounting failure to continuously underinvest in or disregard the rights of all communities and lift up oppressed groups has resulted in the development and mobilization of inspirational grassroots movements led by members of oppressed communities with specific calls to action for real transformation. They are exercising their right to demonstrate their resound disapproval of the status quo, and most specifically, the systemic racism and institutional discriminatory practices ever so pervasive and destructive to our nation. They no longer consent to have their government continue on the same path. So I asked myself, what government could be when we have more women, people of color, immigrants, individuals with disabilities, members of the LGBTQ community, and other marginalized communities in positions of power? Two words come to mind: representative. Representative of our nation's diverse experiences, voices, contributions, and needs. Just, where fairness, objectivity, and truth overcome falsity and prejudice. Under these conditions, a government can be instituted among all people and derive their powers from the consent of the governed, and then rightly be ours. If together we realize the promise of the Declaration of Independence to form a representative and just government, then we can truly strive towards life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all.
This is Gary Johnson again from the Chicago History Museum. The words that resonate for me this year, 2020, are not the most famous or the most quotable, but I think they're very important this year because they reveal a certain mindset about history. These are the first words of the Declaration. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary. Those are the three words. It becomes necessary. The mindset is that there are times in history when certain things become necessary. In 1776, it became necessary for one people to dissolve political bands that bound with another. And in 2020, there is another pivotal year in history. You have heard that same mindset from our speakers, that certain things have become necessary. For Mayor Lightfoot, she wants to use this moment as the opportunity to make real change, even to correct the original sin, which of course in America is slavery. In 2020, it becomes necessary. For Ibu Patel, we can build on what our founders did. We could expand our nation during a time of protest in the streets and spirit in the air. In 2020, it becomes necessary. For Laura Washington, people of color are oppressed by structural and institutional racism. Now America is responding to that moment. In 2020, it becomes necessary. For Jamal Cole, there is inspiration in the passion of the members of the Second Continental Congress, regular people. He sees that same passion in the faces of organizers today. In 2020, it becomes necessary. For Linda Tortolero, she asks what government could be. Truly representative for all and truly just for all. In 2020, it becomes necessary. So I ask you to put on the mindset of the founders in 1776 and the mindset of our speakers in 2020. During this course of human events, during this moment in history, during this year, 2020, for you, what has become necessary? Thank you. Our program is not over. To continue, I would like to pass the virtual microphone to a CHM staff colleague, Public and Community Engagement Manager Erica Griffin, to introduce part 2 of our program, which is called Forward Arts in Action. Erica?